Football will forever be a legend here at Tottenham. It's a massive club. Everything I do is for the long term.
And still Ricky Villa. What a fantastic run. He scored.
Gascoigne going to have a crack. He is, you know. Oh, he's there.
Here's Lucas Moura. Oh, they've done it. The wait for silverware is over.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Tottenham Way. It's me, Tom Allnutt from The Times, and George Sessions from the Press Association here. We are recording, George, a couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours after full time of Tottenham's defeat in the FA Cup to Aston Villa. Another disappointing result, obviously, George. It wasn't the kind of uplifting win that I think we were hoping for. What were your main takeaways from the game? Because I guess it was a slightly funny performance, wasn't it? It was a bit of a mixed bag. What was your kind of intro in your report, I guess? What was your top reflection at the end of the match?
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. Spirited second half, not enough to save Tottenham going out of the FA Cup, and something along the lines of, I feel like every time I write an intro, it's Thomas Frank and pressure, eases pressure, increases pressure. I need to think of a better word than pressure. Scrutiny, I sometimes use.
Cranks up the pressure. That's what happens to pressure. It always gets cranked up or that's the only two words, really.
Yeah. I'm glad you've made me smile earlier than I expected, because I can't lie, I feel pretty downbeat after that. I was quite optimistic before the game. I know Spurs have got a big injury list, but I sort of quite like the look of the team. I've been wanting to see Tell get a run. Odegaard's getting a run now. Xavi in the 10. Dom Solanke was on the bench. That was a big positive. I felt like that gave everyone a lift. And then unfortunately we're getting quite regularly with Thomas Frank's Tottenham is a good 45 and a bad 45. And, I don't think the first half was terrible, to be honest. Not quite as bad as some people are making out, but the 2 goals they concede are just, it's just such easy. It's too easy, isn't it, to score against this Tottenham team at the minute. And look, at half time, we're all kind of thinking, God, this could get ugly. And they show spirit and they come back. And to be honest, it reminds me of the Everton game last season. Spurs were 3-0 down at half time, and I wasn't at Everton, but I remember thinking, there's no way Ange survives this. And then, the Spurs lose 3-2 in the second half, and it keeps it rolling. And I think that's probably kind of where I'm at with everything. I think that's probably the big question fans are going to be saying, is Frank going to go after this? And, we've kind of all consistently said that we don't think the club want to get rid of him. They want to give him time. And I think the second half, the club will say that's enough to show the players are fighting for him, and it keeps it going. I just think the FA Cup, to me, felt like the last chance to really make a mark this season. I don't think Spurs will get top 5. I'd love to be wrong, but I don't think they will, and they're not going to win the Champions League. So to go out of the FA Cup in the 3rd round, hugely disappointing. Even with the injuries, the players they're missing, playing against a brilliant Villa team, 13 wins in 15 now for Villa. But you just wanted Tottenham to give you something today. And they tried and they gave their best, I think it's fair to say, but it wasn't good enough in the end. And that's kind of where we're at the minute with this tenure, unfortunately. Lots of huff and puff, but it's not quite good enough at the minute.
I think I agree with you generally. I think in the first half, at the end of at half time, I think it really felt like kind of end of days stuff, didn't it? The team to me looked broken, and I was walking past George on my way down to back down to the kind of media section in the stadium, and we kind of had a couple of minutes chatting with George at that point at half time, and we were both saying, that last sort of 20 minutes of the first half, just it looked like the players, they looked lost, and the stadium I felt was so deflated, that the way the fans were just filing out, straight away. And I guess it was very close to half time, you could say that, but it was more than that. It felt like we'd kind of gone past the anger stage and the sort of everyone at each other's throats and red cards and arguments in the stands. And actually it was just kind of like pure deflation, like the sense of inevitability and dread of just kind of, here we are again, 2-0 down at home, still with another half of football to come. This could get a lot worse. And I do think at that point, it felt like a really a really tough night for Frank, and we were all kind of wondering where on earth does he go from here? And then actually, you're right. Like in the second half, they played quite well, didn't they? And maybe we should kind of drill down into that a little bit. How much do you think, George, the second half kind of spares Frank? Do you think that there was enough in that kind of second half performance? Because in a way, I felt like it perhaps wasn't quite as clear cut as first half, second half, because I thought actually Tottenham started quite well in the first 20 minutes. I thought they played pretty well. They were quite on the front foot, couple of chances. I thought the fans were really good in that first 20 minutes. It felt like there was a good atmosphere in the stadium. There was a good amount of positivity. And then even the second half, I wouldn't say Spurs were kind of all over Villa the whole time. It was more like a kind of 20-minute burst. They scored the goal. They had a lot of good pressure on Villa for about 10, 15 minutes. But actually, in truth, I thought Villa finished the match fairly comfortably, didn't you? I mean, I felt like in the last kind of 15 minutes, Villa had kind of wrestled the control back of the match. And actually, it didn't really feel like Spurs were going to get the 2-2. I didn't think. It felt like when they were kind of most threatening was kind of around the sort of hour mark, 70 minutes maybe. The last 15, 20 minutes, I thought it all kind of fizzled out a bit. Did you think the second half performance, there was enough there to kind of feel like not only are the players behind Frank, but that perhaps this is something that maybe we can think there is still something left in this tenure?
The second half was definitely an improvement. Two people I feel like should be spoken about in that second half. I thought João Palhinha was everywhere. He was, you couldn't accuse him of not playing for Thomas Frank in this match. He was doing his utmost to kind of win the ball back, even driving forward. He was trying to play progressive passes, which is obviously a big thing about the Thomas Frank era, that there's not enough midfielders doing that. I thought he was brilliant, and obviously it boils over at the end with him, but you couldn't question his desire and his attitude. And I thought Xavi Simons actually really tried to take the game by the scruff of the neck. There was some brilliant dribbles and spins away from opponents, and he scores the offside goal, which is kind of around the 78th, 79th minute mark, and it was offside, and there was no VAR today, which was welcome. It was quite a flowing end-to-end game over the pre-VAR days. But I thought them two in particular were really leading it and really trying to drive Spurs on. I think it is enough. It is going to be enough to keep Thomas Frank in the job. I think we both feel that. The only thing I think I have to say, purely on the basis that fans are saying this, and look, I don't feel strong enough about it to say it's definitely the case, but some fans are saying, is that just the players? They're 2-0 down. They've taken it upon themselves to play like that. I don't think there's really enough evidence to say yes or no either way. The only thing that does kind of stick in my mind a little bit is that Spurs were playing through midfield a lot more than we have seen generally in the Frank era. The whole progressive passing stat keeps doing the rounds. I think there's sort of 11 or 12 players that have played more progressive passes than Tottenham's midfield in the Premier League this season. And it felt to me like they realised, as Villa actually did in the first half, that you can play through this midfield. And Archie Gray was trying to find Xavi, and Palhinha was trying to find Xavi, and Wilson Odobert was coming into those central positions as well. Hopefully that is what Thomas Frank wants the team to do, because I think that is what we haven't seen enough. It's been all about going out on the wings and crosses into the box, and we need to see more Tottenham football, I think, and that is passing through the lines. So hopefully that is what Thomas Frank wanted. But I think that's the sort of debate fans are going to be having now. Was the second half Frank kind of inspiring the team and getting them going, or was it the players just taking it upon themselves? And there's no way of knowing that, but that is the kind of debate that seems to be the case, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of think that would be a slightly kind of glass half empty view on it. I have to say, I feel like in these situations when the players are 2-0 down at half time and the fans were booing inevitably at the half time whistle, I think if they weren't behind Frank at that point, I'm not kind of saying generally that all the players are kind of, really pro Frank right now. I don't think that is the case. But I think it would have been easy for them to kind of fold in the second half, to kind of throw in the towel, to see, some indiscipline, that maybe someone gets sent off, that they concede another couple of goals. I think we could easily have seen that, and we have seen it before, to be honest. When Spurs teams are kind of at the end of their tether with a coach, I think we have seen that. And I didn't think that was, in the performance in the second half. I thought, and I really agree with you about João Palhinha. I thought he was I mean, there's been a lot of talk this season under about his playmaking, his ability to pass the ball forwards. But ultimately, I guess that's not really his job, and I have to say, I look at Palhinha and I think, he lifts the team, in a sense. He lifts the crowd as well, with his tackling, with his energy and with his attitude. Obviously, at the end of the game, I think he had kind of lost his head a bit, and I think Frank was right, to be fair, that I do think Watkins was kind of, he knew what he was doing, Watkins, and I think in the heat of the moment, after you've just had an agonising loss like that, I think it takes a pretty cold-blooded character to be able to not react in that moment. But Palhinha was storming around everywhere. He was hitting people like in a way that you don't see anymore. And I love those tackles. Was it Rodgers? Or was it Tielemans that he basically like a sledgehammer tackle where he just completely
Rodgers was
it? Yeah. And I mean, you can't really do it anymore because the rules don't allow you to. But I wish you could, because it was a great challenge. He took all of the ball and took all of the man, and he has those kind of full-blooded challenges. And I have to say, like, he has his limitations, Palhinha, of course, but I think if you put the right player next to him, I think if you put a Tielemans next to him, to be honest, the way Tielemans played today, always on the half turn, always looking to play through the gaps, exactly the kind of player that Tottenham lack, if I'm honest. And we're all big fans of Archie Gray, but I don't think that is his, necessarily his game. I think if you put the right central midfielder next to Palhinha in midfield, I think you can have a good combination there. So I thought he was a real leader today, actually. And we've talked a lot about leaders and the lack of kind of personalities. I thought Palhinha really showed that. And I think Xavi Simons as well. I mean, I don't know about you, George. I thought that was potentially his best game in a Spurs shirt. I was looking at his numbers after the game, and he had, I can't remember now. I think it was like 56 touches or something, which I think is one of his highest. Maybe not the highest, but one of the highest he's had all season. He had shots and chances, lovely little touch in midfield that one around the corner to somebody. I just thought and I saw the one moment in the second half where he was kind of, trying to get the fans going, throwing his arms up in the air. I just thought I saw a player there who seems to kind of be finding kind of his feet, some confidence, that he wants to be at the centre of attention all the time. I think that's what Spurs need. Ultimately, I feel like if Frank is going to get out of jail, and if Tottenham are going to get out of jail, then it's Xavi Simons is going to be the guy who gives him the keys. I really think that, because ultimately this team, it lacks creativity, it lacks spark, it lacks a bit of love with the fans, it lacks someone who can kind of get the fans feeling good about this team again. And I think if anyone's going to do that, I actually think Xavi Simons is the man in the second half of the season. And there was enough in that performance today. If we're kind of looking at the positives individually, I thought he was really excellent, and I really hope that can be the start of something for Xavi Simons.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it needs to be honest. For everything, for the fans, for Frank, for the team, they need some positivity, because we know what the mood music is like. We know what the vibe is like. It's very low. And look, Spurs did miss Xavi Simons. It's probably not a coincidence. 3 of the dullest games they've been involved in occur when he's not in the team. Thinking of that's the Brentford game. Crystal Palace wasn't great, was it? And look, he comes back against Bournemouth and gets an assist after 5 minutes. Matisse Tell did a lot more of the running for that goal at Bournemouth, but it's still an assist for Xavi. I think it's funny, actually. There's a lot of injuries right now, and clearly Spurs are going to miss Kudos because he's a very good player, and they're going to miss sort of Bentancur being a body. But I did look at that team today, and I did like it, to be honest. I wanted to see Archie Gray get a run, and he's getting the run. But I actually think I did want him really alongside João Palhinha, not Rodrigo Bentancur. It sounds harsh, but I'm kind of done with Rodrigo Bentancur, that inconsistency. A little bit like Yves Bissouma, who's probably going to get a go during the second half of the season just because of the injuries. We've seen enough of those guys just to know that they're not going to be 7, 8 out of 10 every week. And João Palhinha started the season very well. Obviously, he was part of the Bentancur-Palhinha axis, which was obviously getting a lot of criticism. But I think Thomas Frank probably took the wrong one out in João Palhinha. I think looking at today, I don't think Archie Gray was brilliant, and I think João Palhinha was, but I do want to see those two going forward, I think, and seeing if João Palhinha kind of sitting in front of the back four allows Archie to kind of have a bit more freedom and get forward. And likewise on the wings, I I do like Kudos. He's a good player. Arguably, he's been one of Spurs' best players this season. But Tottenham are so predictable when he's in the team. It just feels like a big part of the attacking philosophy is to get the ball out wide, pass it to Kudos. He beats the man, or he comes back and he crosses it in. And Spurs, the last few games, feel a bit more unpredictable, I think. And Tell and Wilson-Odegaard need a lot of work, clearly. And Wilson-Odegaard showed, again, moments today, but I want to see more from him. And he's frustrated me a little bit. But Tell, on the other hand, is now getting
nice
a chance.
Nice finish, Odegaard, we should say, though. I mean, it was a good goal. He took it well.
Yeah, it was a good goal. And you could see his confidence afterwards. He did choose the wrong option when he had a shot soon afterwards, and he could have played in Colomwani. But that was a good moment from him, and that's sort of what I want to see more end product from him. But I think all of a sudden, him and Tell being on the wings, there's just a different kind of energy and feel to Tottenham. And look, in all of these games that those guys have played, they've had a good 10-minute spell, they've had a quiet 20-minute spell, they've had another good 10-minute spell. That's what we're going to get with 20 and 21 and 19-year-olds, unfortunately. But I think there is all of a sudden in that team a little bit of excitement, a little bit of something different. And Tell in particular, he didn't have the best of second halves, albeit I wouldn't have taken him off, I don't think, for Dane Scarlett, to be honest. But in that first half, he was the one, Tell, it felt like was making things happen. He had brilliant action on the left where I think it was John McGinn, he got past and whipped in across, and Danso put it wide. And he's just bringing something at the moment, Tell. And it's worrying the sort of noises around him saying he sort of wants to move and he's trying to potentially get more minutes for, with a World Cup in mind. Because I think all of a sudden there's glimpses in him that maybe he's the player that's going to suddenly lock down the left. And while Spurs are not buying a left midfielder right now, hopefully that changes during the next 2 weeks. I think Tell's probably the one that needs to get a run of games, I think, at left wing. And I think it's given Spurs a bit of unpredictability, which they have lacked over the last few months.
Well, he wants to play, doesn't he? I mean, that's the thing. Going into the World Cup, he basically needs minutes to get in the squad. Otherwise, he's not going to get in that squad. And we know there's a lot of good competition in that area in the France squad. But I mean, I guess with, the injuries that Spurs have now, and another one in Richarlison, going down with a hamstring injury, which, knowing his history, we can't guess, but, we'd imagine that means he's going to be out for a fair amount of time. It's possible that Tell is going to get the games he wants, right? I mean, unless Spurs sign a really top left winger, which they may do, but they may well not do, then Tell could have a good run of games. I mean, maybe on that point, we should talk about Solanke. I mean, I think none of us really expected to see him in the squad today, right? I mean, we've been asking Thomas Frank for since
months.
August. So what's that? August? 6 months, I think we've been asking Thomas how Solanke's getting on. And it got to the point where Thomas just told us, I'll let you know when there's news. And to be honest, he didn't really let us know, did he? Because he gave us a really detailed update on Friday about Kulusevski, which we weren't really expecting, which wasn't good news. But he could have maybe just kind of said, actually, Dom looks like he's pretty close. But maybe it's that situation, George, where, it's been so up and down and so back and forth with Solanke that they literally, thought, well, he's probably going to be all right for this game for the bench. But, if he goes out on the training pitch today and feels pain in his ankle, then he's not going to be. So perhaps Frank doesn't even trust himself really day to day to kind of give a solid update on Solanke, but he was in the squad. He did come on. We presume that was kind of the plan, to give him 10 minutes. How did you think he looked?
I thought he looked okay. I mean, unfortunately, Spurs didn't create a chance for him.
Yeah, that one moment in the box, it sort of landed to him, and I thought maybe he might backheel it or bicycle kick it or something, but he just didn't quite get his feet sorted out.
Yeah, it was almost like the perfect, he'd written his own script. I was really hoping he'd come on and make it 2-2. And yeah, it sort of bounced for him, didn't it? But didn't just quite land so he could get a shot off. Look, I think clearly he's nowhere near ready match fitness wise. And the fact that Frank put on Dane Scarlett before him shows that, probably was told you can play him for a maximum 5 minutes. And I was kind of half thinking, if he does score the goal and it goes to extra time, does he kind of come off 5 minutes later? Because you just can't risk him, can you? Unfortunately, we didn't get that scenario. But look, that's a massive plus. It's a shame that Richarlison's gone down now and Solanke's gone back. It feels like Groundhog Day and deja vu, because that was last season when one player would come back and then you'd lose another.
But it's not going to be perfect timing, is it, George? Because I mean, it could almost be perfect timing, but I don't imagine Solanke's going to be ready to kind of start against West Ham or Dortmund. You know, it looks to me like a player today who's going to need 3 or 4 games off the bench, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, if we're jumping ahead, I would probably wonder if Frankfurt, in what is that, the 28th, I think, of January, is maybe when Spurs think, you know, presuming he comes back into the Champions League squad, which I think would be the case. I'm wondering if Spurs think then if they need to win that game. He scored there last season, didn't he, with a well-taken penalty in front of their noisy stand. If that's the game that you kind of earmark him to start. West Ham at home, you imagine it would be Colomwani. Dortmund feels too close, doesn't it? I don't think I'd fancy starting at Burnley away, even if it's not Sean Dyche's Burnley, just for the the kind of optics of getting a batter in there. So yeah, maybe Frankfurt or maybe the Man City game afterwards. But I think he's such a quality player, and I don't think he has the sort of he's a good finisher, but I don't think he's the best kind of, you know, snappiest striker of a ball. But it's his link-up play, isn't it? And I think Xavi in particular will really benefit from having him there, just somebody to bounce the ball off. And likewise, if Odegaard and Tel are going to be the wingers going forward, you know, we saw Odegaard whipping some balls into the box. Same for Tel. They weren't always brilliant and accurate, but actually Solanke's movement is very good. And I remember watching his highlights at Bournemouth, would have been that last season. It was so many balls in from Semenyo, funnily enough, and Tavernier, and he's getting there at the near post, stabbing it home, or actually going to the back post. And he will bring, you know, a lot to this Tottenham team if he can stay fit. And I think, you know, you'd like to think, given how cautious Spurs and Frank have been, that he is going to stay fit now. And look, that's the big positive from today. He's back on the pitch. And with him, look, Spurs should score goals. They should create more chances. I think he's generally an all-rounder, isn't he? You'd say he's sort of, you know, better than Richarlison at a lot of those kind of key facets, hold-up play, dropping
it's
deep.
The link-up,
even
isn't it? Like, it's a weird thing to say, because in a way, like, you know, you're getting your main striker back. But actually, weirdly, it's not really the goals, I think, that, you know, I'm kind of more optimistic about, because, you know, I don't know what was Solanke's numbers last season, 12 or something, or I mean, it was kind of low teens, wasn't it, in total? Like, you're not getting suddenly, you know, like a demon striker who's going to, you know, grab bags of goals in the second half of the season. But what you are getting with Solanke, which I think you're not getting with Richarlison, is just the link up. That the hold up play is so much tidier, you know, it's so much smoother. And to be honest, the way Frank plays, of course, like, there's more pressure, there's more weight on that area of the game in terms of the striker. I think so many times we've seen the ball go direct to Richarlison and the touch is loose, you know, and of course, like, I feel for Richarlison, because he's had some games where he's just been, you know, ploughing a lone furrow up there, and it's been a real difficult job for him. But equally, he doesn't make it look easy. You know, sometimes, you know, difficult balls that I think Solanke could make a job of, he doesn't. So I'll be interested to see how he kind of gets on with that. We should say, you know, golden mix zone update, that when Solanke walked through, I don't want to, you know, cast any any kind of bad note on Solanke at all, but of all the players who walked through, he was definitely the one who sort of had the brightest look in his eye. Let's just say that. Everyone else was sort of doom and gloom, head down. I've never seen a player march through a mix zone with their head down so grumpily as Pedro Porro, for example. Like, he was straight through, no chance. But Solanke was, you know, pretty upbeat. We said to him, you know, do you fancy a chat? And he, you know, he didn't, which I think is fair enough, because he, you know, probably doesn't want to kind of talk too soon. Let's say that. But we said, you know, how are you feeling? And he said, you know, really good. And he seemed to be quite positive and quite enthusiastic, I'd say, generally. So, yeah, I mean, I think as well, it gives a good lift for the fans, you know, more than anything. You know, it didn't quite come off. I suspect Frank was probably hoping that there would be a sort of a swell of maybe, you know, excitement that Solanke was back, maybe relief. But he just didn't quite get that kind of golden chance, did he? What did you make generally of the subs, George? I saw online quite a lot of fans were saying that, you know, Tottenham had momentum. They kind of had a sort of wave of momentum, I guess, you know, in that second half, and that maybe the subs didn't necessarily help. Do you share that view, or do you think that that's a little bit unfair on Frank?
I think Dane Scarlett
didn't have many options, did he, in terms of the bench, if we're honest, in terms of the attack?
Yeah, I was going to mention that, in fairness. You know, I remember looking about 65 minutes, because Villa were bringing on Watkins at that point. I remember looking at the bench and just thinking, I don't think I would change it. Spurs were sort of getting into their groove. Odegaard got the goal about 10 minutes earlier. And you had that little spell where Xavi had a shot. Then I think it was Palhinha had a shot. Ben Davies put one over. It felt like Spurs were sort of on top there, and I didn't think Frank needed to do anything then. Scarlett for Tell, I don't think I would have done that. It's funny because I've been sort of saying put on Luca Williams-Barnett just to get the crowd on side, but I think Dane Scarlett's almost kind of been around so long, he doesn't feel like a young academy player anymore, unfortunately for him. And Tell was doing quite well. And actually, Tell, just sort of a final point on him, he come off the pitch and was sort of like rallying his teammates, which I love to see. And he was sort of whipping up the crowd, and then the South Stand gave him a good rendition. And it just makes me think that I think Spurs have, I hope Spurs don't let him go this month. I don't think they will, to be honest. Frank was asked that recently, and he said, we haven't got many options, so I don't think that's likely. But I think they need to give him a chance to show if he can be the player that we all sort of hope he can be. And then look, he brought on Jed Spence, didn't he, late on, and obviously Solanke. Look, Solanke did get a massive cheer, so you're right. I think that did lift the fans, and unfortunately there just wasn't that kind of chance. But just looking down, I mean, Destiny Udogie actually was back on the bench, so that was another positive. On a cold mid-January night where I got back to my car and it was icy, I'm not sure I would have wanted to test his hamstrings, to be honest, for a few minutes. So I didn't mind that, and I thought Ben Davies actually did pretty well again today. And obviously Kolo Muani had come on earlier, so I don't think you can be too critical of Thomas Frank's subs today. I guess just going back to what you said with Pedro Porro, that's kind of reminded me of just a little bit of a negative, I guess. I listened to Mickey van der Ven's post-match interview with Spurs Play, and the first thing he said was, I'm gutted. Our levels were nowhere near in that first half, nowhere near, and doesn't matter what we did in the second half. Our levels were nowhere near first half, and we got punished for it. And you're talking about Pedro Porro walking through the mix zone sort of dejected, and I just sort of felt like in Thomas Frank's press conference today, and I like that he called out Ollie Watkins. I thought that was good because that's his former player, and that's kind of sort of a real shining example for him of taking someone and turn them into gold. And I didn't think he was going to be so hard on Watkins, kind of provoking Palhinha, but I was glad he did. But Thomas Frank was just a little bit too upbeat in that press conference, I think, given how we all feel as Tottenham fans about this result. The first thing he started speaking about was how good the second half was. And it's a tiny, tiny thing, but it just showed a little bit of a disconnect with what the players are feeling right now in terms of this being a trophy and the real chance to save the season, and him kind of looking for the positives. And he should look for the positives, absolutely. He should mention how good the second half was. But I think he could have started with kind of how gutted he was to go out of the cup and it being a real, I understand the fans' frustration. I think that's just where there's just a bit of a disconnect between what his kind of expectations are and maybe what he's kind of thinking about as the first thought, and what the fans and the players, to be honest. I think there's so much frustration and kind of anger, I guess, isn't there, with the fan base, with the players. We saw that at Bournemouth, and I think the fans and the players today both feel gutted. You can see that full time. They all collapsed on the pitch, other than Palhinha, who obviously got involved in the Watkins mess. But I just think Frank could have been a bit more sort of downbeat about the result. Like we've seen a lot of the top managers, when they lose a big game, they're absolutely gutted, and it's a nightmare for us. You get nothing from them. But he was very kind of pleased with that second half, and I just think that was just where he needed to sort of read the room a tiny bit better, I think.
What was his demeanour, George? I mean, was that just in terms of what he said, in terms of his words, or did you get the feeling in terms of his body language that he was also quite kind of encouraged overall?
I think it is fair to say he was encouraged, yeah. The first question to him was kind of, your reflections on the game. So he could have, I think he did have the opportunity there to say how gutted and disappointed he was. And he did go on to say that, I asked him, what can you say to the fans after this result? Because some of them will think the season's virtually over now. Going out of the cup. The cup was the last thing to salvage the season. And he spoke about being hurt and disappointed.
You were trying to help him along with the right message.
I kind of, yeah, you could say that. But he kind of, and he did mention about being hurt and disappointed, but he kind of moved it on to talking about how it was a good opportunity and they really wanted to get through, and unfortunately they didn't. But I just felt like he probably in that moment maybe could have said, I understand the fans being frustrated, but we've got the Champions League. And look, we know Tottenham are not going to win the Champions League, but you just think in these moments where everyone's low, you sort of give something else to aim for. And I know that, Spurs are 14th in the Premier League. It doesn't feel like they're going to get top four. They're going to obviously, go too far in the Champions League. But I think they could have been a little bit more, could have sort of zoned in a bit more on that message. But he was encouraged by the performance. And I understand why, because the second half was good. And look, these games and the Bournemouth defeat, Sunderland, we're seeing a bit more attacking football. I guess the question is it too late for him with the fans? Because it feels, there was chance in the stadium. And I don't really think there was a lot of chance from the Tottenham fans against him. The Villa fans were obviously going for him, and that's obviously not great for him.
George, let's get into that, because I think the way the fans reacted to Frank today, I thought was interesting. I don't know if you were there sort of right before kickoff when Paul COYS was announcing the team, and as he often does, he sort of said, the team led by Thomas Frank, and at that moment there were certainly not cheers, and there were, in my opinion, a few boos as well in the crowd. And I think it would be unfair to say there were lots of boos, but there were some boos I think were audible. But there was also definitely no kind of applause or cheers, and I don't know if that's common. I sort of feel like the head coach normally would get a cheer in that scenario. And I also think, obviously there were boos at half time, which was inevitable because Villa had just scored a second and Spurs had a really poor 20-25 minutes. There were boos at the end as well, which I think was perhaps slightly more surprising given that Tottenham had a good second half, but ultimately they lost the game again. They've lost at home, right? And, they didn't look like equalising. So I guess that, it's kind of understandable. There were a couple of points, I think. There was one, wasn't there, where Villa fans started singing "You're getting sacked in the morning," and it sounded like there were quite a lot of fans in the South Stand who joined in that moment. And there was another chant which Villa sang about Thomas Frank being an Arsenal fan, which just kind of landed, right? Like it's one of those chants that right now it just kind of felt like, yeah, that kind of, really nails the way that Spurs fans are thinking, but that kind of feeling that Frank doesn't fit, and I think those two moments when they were joining in with the getting sacked in the morning, and again, I don't think it was anywhere near like a majority. I think it was a real small minority, but it was there, wasn't it? As you say, is there any way back, in terms of this kind of connection? I think it really gets to the heart of this Frank problem, doesn't it? Like we can talk about the results and the performances and the messaging, and I think, we have, and you can go into all those things and a lot of analysis. But is there any way for Frank at this point to kind of convince the Spurs fans that he is a Tottenham head coach?
I do think it's hard. I felt like the FA Cup was the real chance for him this season. In the same way that if Ange and Tottenham had gone out to Frankfurt, then everyone would say Ange is one of the worst managers in Tottenham's history. They just would. But the fact that he carried it all the way and then wins the trophy changes the narrative, doesn't it? We know that. I think just going back to the fan chants, I think you're right. I think it is a very, very small minority in the South Stand that joined in the getting sacked in the morning. It certainly wasn't the whole South Stand. And I think actually generally, and to be fair to Frank, he repeatedly mentioned how unified the fans were in the second half. And I think he's right there. They really got behind the team, and I hope that wasn't just because it was the FA Cup and it means so much to this club, and it, when it's a Premier League game against West Ham, it'll be different. But they really got behind the players, and they were trying to suck that ball in. So that was a big tick today. I think it's really tricky with Thomas Frank, because we're talking about his position every 3 days, every week, and it's not great. But I think the fans. I think the majority of fans, and whether that's 51 or 60 or 70 or 80 or 90, I think the majority of the fans, it is fair to say, probably want him to go. Is there a way back? It feels like, I think by now we should have seen a moment the two examples we always go to are Pochettino and Mikel Arteta. Pochettino on January 1st had the 5-3 against Chelsea, but he'd already started to turn it around before that. He had the Villa win, and I think Spurs might have lost after that Villa 2-1 where Kane scores a free kick, but the wins had started to kind of tally up after then in December, and they obviously went on. And also crucially for him, they were in the League Cup semi-final, weren't they, at that point in this time of his tenure in that first season. And then Arteta's the other example that we always go to, and again, he won the FA Cup in his first season, in his first 6 months. And I think that's for me where it feels different to Pochettino and Arteta. I think if we're glass half full, we say those two guys needed time and they got it going. So it's the same message for Frank. But the trouble is in those first 25, 30 games, 6 months, I think we'd seen enough to believe that they deserved time, and that's why they got time. And I think really now, if we strip it back and we say it black and white, unfortunately, I think Spurs are technically in a worse position than they are this time last January, because they're 14th in the league, which is the exact same point after 21 games last season. They've got a big injury list again. And unfortunately, they're now out of both domestic cups, whereas this time last year, you still were clinging on to the Carabao Cup. They just beat Liverpool as a big win. They were still in the FA Cup, albeit they'd beaten Tamworth in the third round, and they would go on to lose to Aston Villa. And of course, you had the Europa League as the carrot, as the thing. When the players came back, that was how we salvaged the season. And I can't see Spurs doing anything of note in the Champions League. So when you look at it now, Thomas Frank's come in to improve things and to improve the Premier League form, and to make Tottenham more competitive. And unfortunately, he's doing a worse job, I think, just on those bases than last season. And I think that's where the fans have lost patience with him. And then on top of that, is probably maybe even more than this, is just the style of football. We haven't seen enough attacking intent. And to be fair, the last 3 games we've started to see it, but that's after sort of 25 games of his tenure. And I don't know even if he does that for the next period, and I don't think he's going to go too soon. I really don't. We've all said the same thing. The club want to give him time. Vinay certainly is behind him, and I don't think he's going to go after this game. I really don't. I think the club will try and give him more time. I'm not sure if he makes the whole season, but I think they will try and give him time to turn it around. But I think it's going to be hard to win over the fans now, because even if Spurs finish 5th this season, which I guess is in the realms of possibility, is that enough? Maybe it is. I think it is enough if you're seeing good football as well, because I think, unfortunately, Tottenham fans don't want to watch their team scoring just set-piece goals or just crosses into the box. That they need to see the attacking flair that is in the DNA of the club, and it always will be. And it's why managers like Conte and Mourinho have partly why they've failed as well, because they didn't fit the philosophy of the club. And at the minute, Frank doesn't fit the philosophy of the club, I don't think.
Guys, if you're listening, please do give us a like and a subscribe. Give us a good comment. If you don't like what we're listening, then just quietly, turn us off and do something else. If you're watching us on YouTube, then please do press like and subscribe. Press the hype button. I'm not sure what that does, but it seems to make good things happen. And send us an email as well. It's the Tottenham Way pod at gmail.com, the Tottenham Way pod at gmail.com. We're going to do a January Q&A pod this week because we've got a rare week without a midweek fixture. So we'll sweep up all the kind of questions that we've been getting over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and some of the good points and comments and stuff that we've been getting on YouTube and across socials as well. So please do get in touch with us with anything you think we've missed or anything you want us to discuss, even if it's slightly off the wall or a bit different. We love those kind of questions to get us talking about slightly different things to the normal threads. And thanks for all your support. We're really enjoying doing the pod. We're gaining all the time, and we keep liking, subscribing, because it really makes it easier for us to keep going. I mean, George, I kind of agree with you there. It feels, I think, for Frank now almost like we're sort of waiting for the kind of result or the kind of performance that it makes it untenable, if you know what I mean. I think most of the fans kind of are waiting for that moment as well. felt like at half time today that today might have been that game, but I also think no one really expected it to be today. You know, it's a cup game. Ultimately, there's not so much jeopardy as there is on a Premier League game. You're playing against Aston Villa, who everyone knows are flying and they're a great team. And it's worth saying, by the way, that, you know, what a turnaround. I mean, Villa, you know, were in the Championship when Spurs were in the Champions League final, you know, and you've got two teams here who have just been going in opposite directions for the last 5.5 years. They crossed somewhere, about a year or two ago. And now Spurs are, you know, bottom half of the table and Villa flying up in third. And watching them today really reminded me of kind of almost that Pochettino team, you know, not a team of superstars, you know, and that is, I guess, the counterpoint to be honest, what I've been saying for a lot of the season, which is I don't really think this squad is a kind of top 4 quality squad. I don't think really the Villa team is either. You know, I don't think they've got world-class players. There aren't many players in the Villa team that Real Madrid would want to sign, but it's just really good coaching, you know, really well-aligned club. A club that has completely backed the manager, has a sporting director who is really on the same page as the manager, and obviously a really, really talented coach. And I guess, you know, when we're talking about Spurs needing to sign here, sign there, ultimately, this is kind of the thing that we were actually hoping Frank would do, right? You know, and I wrote a piece in the Times on Friday for Saturday, you know, about basically the kind of the 3 big things that Frank was meant to do, which was to develop players, bring in a better culture. You know, and he hasn't done either of those things. You know, developing players, which players has he made better? You know, the culture at Spurs has got worse. You know, that we know from fans, players, board, everywhere there are arguments. You know, and he hasn't achieved the kind of things I think that he was brought in to achieve. That is his biggest problem. And I guess, you know, we're going in now with the next couple of games. You know, West Ham, Burnley, Dortmund. And then it's going to be a really tough run that we know is coming up in February. Maybe that suits the team. I don't know. But it feels like these next 2 or 3 games could be those kind of red zone fixtures. Do you feel like that as well?
To be honest, I actually think these next games are games that Spurs will win, madly enough. I mean, you know, look, West Ham are shambles, aren't they? I guess the worry that I know, you know, some fans are saying is, are Tottenham going to be the next West Ham, of where, you know, there's a disconnect with the ownership and the fans and the players, and it just spirals and spirals and spirals. And hopefully that's not going to be the case. But this West Ham team is really in free-for-all. And I'm kind of surprised, actually, that Nuno Espirito Santo is still there. It would be incredibly Spursy for him to come back and beat Tottenham and beat Thomas Frank. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But no, I think, honestly, a whole week for this game, yes, Spurs have got injuries, but actually, you know, as we've just said, that there is attacking quality in this team. And look, Romero will be back. So, you know, you've got Van der Ven, Romero, you've got Penn Davies, who's, you know, put in 2 very solid performances now and is maybe actually going to become the regular left back if it is 1 game a week, because he does balance the team. He really does. So, no, I think this West Ham game is a really, really good chance for Spurs to win at home. And then after that, it's Dortmund. And look, that is... I'm not sure it's going to be the case, but that is the massive occasion, I guess, so to speak. Champions League under the lights, a big team. You know, what, they finalists 2 years ago, or yes, 2 years ago, wasn't it? It was finalists, wasn't they? You know, beat Dortmund, Solanke scores, and all of a sudden the top 8 is still on. And then actually there is something to play for this season, because Spurs are going to miss out on that knockout phase. They're not going to have the nightmare of Champions League playoff round first leg, Arsenal at home, Champions League playoff round second leg. And then, you know, maybe by the time that comes around, the team is suddenly looking more like we want it to be. But I think these are good games. You know, West Ham at home, Burnley away, they're the games Spurs need to be winning, which is why I don't think that anything dramatic is going to happen with Thomas Frank, even though a lot of the fans have turned and he's being booed and you're getting boos after every home game. These fixtures, I think, are quite kind. And you've also got to look at the scenario that I think Spurs have got a minimum of 21 games left this season. That's a long time for a caretaker to be in position. You know, it's never a good look for a club to have a caretaker if that is going to be the route that Spurs eventually go down. And I just think it's too early from that point of view from the club's point of view, is what I'm saying, for them to make a decision on Frank over the next couple of weeks and to put a caretaker in for kind of 19, 20 games. I think they will try and back him as long as possible. And in fairness, there's there is other issues to deal with. Fabio Paratici is still there. It's a January transfer window, and the squad is looking very, very thin. That bench explains it. Today there's rumours of Dragusin going out, of Tell going out. There's a lot to sort, and I think the club will probably try and keep as much stability as possible, and that will mean that Frank will stay. So he has got a chance, with that in mind, to still try and turn this around. And I don't personally think he's going to. I feel like it has gone too far. But these are the games he's got to win. If he wins them and he builds momentum, then who knows?
I guess in a way it should become clearer, and I sort of reluctant to say that, because I feel like last season with Ange, we were constantly saying, we don't know now, but in 2 weeks we will definitely know, because it always felt like there was sort of a checkpoint coming up where everything was going to be black and white. But it feels like, doesn't it, these next, West Ham at home, Dortmund at home, Burnley away, Eintracht away, if they don't, get the right results, and I don't really know what that is, maybe let's say 2-3 wins out of those 4, and I think from West Ham and Burnley, they're going to need 4 points, I'd say. They can't really lose either of those, I don't think. Then, I think, as you say, Frank gets probably, most of the rest of the season, and perhaps even the whole of the rest of the season. But if he gets through these next 3 or 4 games and those results don't go the right way, particularly the ones at home, then it could go south quite quickly, right? But I mean, that opens up the whole other debate that we've talked about before about, where do you go? And as you said, in terms of replacements and interim, there is still a long way left to go in the season. But perhaps the picture will become clearer in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Let's see. George, anything else to add to this agenda before we go, do you think?
No, I think we've covered most of it, haven't we? I guess just a final plug for any questions and any thoughts on transfers for the Q&A pod we're going to do. Unfortunately, I can't talk about Brennan Johnson being a striker again. I feel like I've done that on a few of those Q&A pods. That window's gone.
You can go and join the Crystal Palace podcast and go and start, putting that idea out there in South London and see how they take it.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of going to play as a 10, so, we'll see. He probably won't score now all season. I'll look like an absolute fool. But no, yeah, get your sort of questions in, and we'll try and get through as many as possible, because and we'll go back through some of the YouTube and the Spotify comments as well, because we really appreciate all the feedback and all the interaction that we're getting. And yeah, at the Tottenham Way, the Tottenham Way pod, at gmail.com is the email, and at the Tottenham Way for all the different social accounts. And yeah, we'll try and get that one out by Wednesday morning.
I think that's it, guys. Let's finish on a positive note. The last few games obviously haven't delivered, but there are some glimmers there, aren't there? There've been some glimpses. It hasn't been even full halves, let alone full matches, but there've been some good spells, and perhaps we should take Frank's point of view that this team is just starting to show some signs, perhaps. And, maybe we should just look at Villa. Ultimately, teams can go through even kind of worse nadir than what Spurs are going through right now. They can even get relegated and still come back. These things can turn around quite quickly. You never know. It's been a tough few months. I mean, even for us covering it, it's a real privilege to do this job, but it's been a pretty gloomy period, hasn't it? That Europa League final aside, it's been a difficult few months. So we're all hoping for an upturn in form, some better performances and some more positive news. We'll be back this week with the Q&A, hopefully on sort of Tuesday, Wednesday. And then obviously we'll be reacting as well to the West Ham game next weekend. So Marcus and Tom B will all be giving their views as well. So do get in touch. But I think that's it for now. So thanks for listening again, and cheerio, guys.